To today's edition of Red Talks. My name is Robyn. I'm the president of Republican Women's Federation of Michigan, and today my two guest speakers are Meghan Reckling and Tony Daunt. We are super excited to have them, and we have a live studio audience along with us today. Welcome, Meghan and Tony.
Thank you.
Well, Meghan has been involved in politics since she was about 4, and she is currently Livingston
County GOP chair.
Yes. And she does about everything else. You should see how long her bio is. I actually met Tony when he was the executive director of the Freedom Fund. And he has just made the transition over to the executive director of Fair Maps. Redistricting is today's hot topic, and you are going to gain a world and a wealth full of information. So please share this video, share this podcast, get the word out on redistricting. Welcome again. Tell us, why is redistricting such a hot topic in your world?
Oh goodness. Well, thanks everybody for having us. It's a pleasure to be here and speaking to the folks who will be watching this afterwards. When we walked in a few moments ago, while the other speakers were still here, they were giving very passionate speech about something they believe deeply in, which is the pro-life movement and protecting the unborn and innocent lives. And that tells me that that's obviously a big deal for each of you. And it's a big deal for me, it's a big deal for Meghan. And when we think about redistricting, as we set about, this commission sets about drawing these maps, it's things like the pro-life movement and protecting the gains that have been made in this state. It's things like protecting us from vaccine passports and some of the craziness that we've seen over the last year related to the COVID and the restrictions and the way that this governor has handled things. And the majorities that we have, that Republicans have in this state, are very dependent on having lines that are competitive and that are fair, and that good candidates can run in and win and continue to protect those things. So all of those items that I mentioned and more, lower taxes, less regulations, more freedom, that's all on the line when we talk about redistricting. And the left is convinced that they deserve a majority. They deserve to have all of the constitutionally statewide elected offices, the state Senate, the state House, and to have a majority of the congressional delegation, because that's just, in their mind, that's how it should be. And so, show of hands, how many are familiar in some way with the Michigan Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission? Okay, so
Good.
At least that's good. At least you've heard about it. It was a constitutional amendment passed in 2018. And I've been opposed to it since I heard about it, since they started circulating petitions for it. I fought it, tried to fight it on the ballot in 18. I put my name on a lawsuit with the federal court seeking to overturn it, or at a minimum change some of the unconstitutional restrictions on who can serve on this commission. Unfortunately, to this point, I've been unsuccessful, but I'm still in the fight. I'm still ready to participate. And I look at it as, I may disagree with this setup. I think it's a foolish way to do such an important task, but it's what the voters approved, and it's in our Constitution, and it is the law of the land now. And we need to operate within the stricture that exists. And so that's what my role as the executive director of Fair Maps is to do. It's to educate folks on the importance of participating in the commission, of being aware of what they're doing, what they're talking about, who is speaking to them. And then Meghan has been a fantastic help with me over the last few months as somebody who understands the importance and has been going around doing even more of these trainings and meetings than I have. And she's full of knowledge. She's got a lot more detail in terms of how you can help. But kind of from a 30,000 foot overview, generally in the state over the last few cycles of redistricting, what we had was, it was in the hands of the legislature. And in 2001 and in 2011, the Republicans controlled both houses of the state legislature and the governor's office. And so they were able to set the lines. And one can argue, probably depends on your party affiliation, whether or not those lines were skewed towards Republicans and against Democrats. But that's the way things have been done. That's the way they've generally been done in this state for a number of decades and really throughout this country. The Democrats and the left, as I mentioned, put this thing on the ballot. Now it's in the hands of an independent commission. And so some of the items that the legislature used to draw the lines are at risk. There are certain federal requirements that you need to follow and respect the Voting Rights Act in protecting majority-minority districts, which is what leads to those kind of somewhat funky-looking districts down in Wayne County and Detroit, where it looks like they kind of start in Detroit and then snake their way to the west and then up north to Pontiac. Well, they had to do that in order to collect enough minority voters to meet the restrictions or meet the requirements of the Voting Rights Act. So you've got the Voting Rights Act, you've got various constitutional issues you need to protect at the federal level. And then here in the state, the key thing that they focused on were what were called APOL standards. And it's named after a gentleman named Bernie Apol, who was a former director of elections. He was appointed a special master by the Supreme Court in, I believe it was the 81 redistricting cycle. And what he decided in his rules and what the state eventually codified was protecting and minimizing municipal breaks, so that when you were drawing lines, you weren't breaking up the city of Lansing into 2 or 3 different spots and spoking it out. You weren't breaking up the city of Detroit or the city of Grand Rapids. You weren't splitting Napoleon Township and Jackson right down the middle for partisan gain. And ultimately, that was a pretty fair way. If you look at the maps of Michigan, they're relatively square and compact compared to many other states, especially when you consider kind of the shape of Michigan. And because of the way people live, because of how Democrats generally are more compact and clustered, and Republicans are more spread out and in rural areas, that type of mindset or that type of focus generally harmed Democrats' ability for winning offices. That's why you see in the city of Detroit, they win legislative races 90 to 10 or 95 to 5, really ridiculous numbers. And then there's certainly Republican seats where the people win high 50s, low 60s%. And then as the polarization has gotten larger over the last few years, even up into the 80s in some of the more rural districts in north of Clare, that's simply a product of where people live and the polarization. And people are, they're clustering. So if you live in a rural area and you're kind of, more liberal, you're probably like, I'm gonna get away from these folks, I'm gonna move to the city. And if you live in the city, you're like, to heck with this, I'm moving out to the townships where I'm not gonna be bothered and my taxes are better. And so this commission is meant to fix that, but without really saying that's what they're fixing. Mm-hmm. So what they focused on are communities of interest. Communities of interest is a very nebulous term. It means pretty much everything and nothing. And it's set up that way so that quite frankly, so that the left can find things that allow them to justify splitting these municipal lines apart and spoking their votes out into the suburbs, out into the rural areas, and claiming what they believe is their rightful heir to a majority in this state. And so this commission, they begin 16 public hearings a week from Tuesday. So on the May 11th is their first public hearing. It's in Jackson. The next one is the 13th, which is Thursday, and that's in Kalamazoo. And so what we've been doing is working with stakeholders throughout the state, Meghan in particular, getting people lined up to speak at these events. I'm not sure where each of you are from. I'm sure you're from different pockets of the state. And so you surely have a meeting at least somewhere within your area. And I highly encourage you to attend, to learn about it, to be prepared. In order to do that, there's a few sites you can go to. If you go to redistrictingmichigan.org.
Can you say that for our listeners one more time?
Yep.
For them to write it down.
Redistrictingmichigan.org. And that will take you directly to the website for the commission that's hosted by the state. And that has information on the commissioners, it has information on the meetings, all their previous meetings, on the hearings, what to expect when you show up. And so familiarize yourself with that. Make sure that you're talking about the importance of this with people in your home, in your community, in your church, in your Rotary, whatever you're involved with, people, especially people who think like us, and they don't even necessarily need to be Republicans. They can be independents or Democrats, people who understand the need to keep our communities whole. That we have regional chambers of commerce for a reason. We have regional municipal authorities or regional athletic authorities for kids. I live in DeWitt, and there's a DeWitt area recreational authority, and it's City of DeWitt, DeWitt Township, and some of the surrounding areas. And if you live there, your kids can participate in these after-school sports, volleyball, lacrosse, things like that. And it's common sense, right? You do that because you live close together. You're going to share services. You're going to share tax rates. You're going to share school board members. You want to continue, and you want to share elected officials. If your voice is diffused, then you don't have as much power and as much ability to impact change here in the state of Michigan. And so think those things through. Think of ways to talk about a community of interest that calls to mind the things that exist in your community. Your church, 4-H, Rotary, things like that. We want to be a resource. I want to be a resource through Fair Maps. Meghan wants to be a resource in her role, and happy to answer any questions, whether they are directly to us, whether through Robyn. Again, we want to be a resource. We will be, I'm hoping to get some kind of basic message points up on our website for Fair Maps. If you want to exercise your fingers again, I'll give you that one, and that one is fairmapsmichigan.org. And for those again, fairmapsmichigan.org. And on that, again, I hope to have some basic message points about communities of interest and how you can participate. So familiarize yourself with those websites and with this information. And with that, I hate to be rude. I have a 2:30 back in my office, but I know Meghan knows what she's talking about. So I'm going to hand it over to her and let her take over. And again, thank you very much for the time. And I look forward to each of you participating in the process.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Meghan,
Yes.
you get to be the star of the show now.
Oh boy. I appreciate that.
You are so knowledgeable about this topic.
Thank you.
There's so much to share.
There is.
And I know community of interest is the buzzword. What would your response be when, start with this question and then we can go into communities of interest.
Perfect.
I know one question that people have is, well, isn't this redistricting stuff pretty much going to be in the Detroit area? Aren't they going to leave most of Michigan alone? What would your response to that be?
My response would be, under the way that the commission has to draw the new lines, absolutely not. Everywhere in Michigan is going to be impacted with the 3 levels of redistricting that they're doing on the congressional, state house, and state senate side. All of the districts are going to be impacted. The way redistricting has traditionally worked is they lay the current districts down on the map. They look at how the population has trended and changed throughout the state, and then they start to move the district lines around from there. This commission cannot do that. They cannot lay the existing districts down on the map, so they are going to have no geographical references as to what makes up a current state house district or a current state senate district. When it comes to our congressional seats, we're going from 14 seats to 13 seats. So the current district lines are really irrelevant. And so depending on how the commission decides to start, when they start to actually lay lines on the map, will really determine how the districts are going to get drawn from there. Most of the educated people who are map makers and the consultants believe that they will start down in Southeast Michigan, especially on the congressional level, with the VRA majority minority districts, draw those and lay those down, and then move out and kind of up the state from there. But again, with communities of interest, it can really change how our districts look. There's kind of this fundamental thing ingrained in the minds of elected officials, those who are involved in politics, and even some in the public, that we're going to end up with really nice, clean lines. And if you look at what has happened in Arizona and in California, they really end up with jigsaw, puzzle piece-like districts that really look awkward. And so our districts could really dynamically and drastically change under this.
Okay. Talk to me about communities of interest. It's everything, it's nothing.
It's everything and it's nothing.
It's not in the Constitution.
Correct. Kind of.
And my understanding is we get an opportunity to have a say to be able to help define what is a community of interest.
Correct.
Share with us the importance of that.
So I cannot stress enough how much we know that the entire redistricting process is going to focus and center directly on communities of interest. It is a very ambiguous term. The Constitution lays out some criteria. It can be things like historical areas, ethnicities, the language that people speaks. It definitely says that it cannot be related to a political party or a political official. So I come from Livingston County. We're an incredibly Republican county. I can't use that as a way to define my community of interest because they're not allowed to take that into consideration. For those who live in a congressional district where you love your congressman, and if you want to walk into the commission and say, I love Congressman Lisa McClain, and I want to make sure that she is my congressional person after this, they can't take that into account. That's irrelevant to them. And so when we look at communities of interest, we know that the commission is going to use these again to draw the new lines. And because it is so undefined, the Constitution requires that they hold meetings throughout the state to take input from the residents as to how we, the residents of Michigan, are going to define communities of interest. They're required to have at least 10 public meetings, but they've scheduled 16. As Tony pointed out, the first one starts next Tuesday,
Right.
and the last one is scheduled for the first week in July. You can visit fairmapsmichigan.org for a complete list of dates and times and where those meetings are going to be held. But there's other ways to submit your input on a community of interest other than just attending a meeting. You can do it through email, and their email is redistricting at michigan.gov. So that's redistricting at michigan.gov. So you can email them, or you can visit their website, which I think Tony said, but I'll say again, which is redistrictingmichigan.org. And they have an online public comment portal where you can go and you could submit your community of interest as well. And so is the next question going to be, how do we define these communities of interest? If I can read your mind?
Yes.
So how do we define communities of interest? When you look at how the Democrats are defining communities of interest, we have some ability to look at how they intend to do this from places like the University of Michigan that have worked with organizations and their academics, their nonpartisan academics, to create reports that have been presented to the commission on how they could look to define communities of interest. And I'm sure you would all be shocked to know that most of those are how we look, how we talk, what our ethnicities are, or our genealogical histories, not things that describe where we live or where our kids go to school or where we have a social life. So when you think of a conservative perspective on how to define communities of interest, it's really important that we think about areas of where we live, where our kids go to school, what's important to us in our social life, like church, and we find unique things in our own communities that describe our municipalities in different ways. So Tony listed off some examples, but to get into them a little bit more uniquely, things like a fire authority that covers multiple townships or your city, things like police authorities that do the same thing. If you have a library, there's usually library districts. School districts are a great way to describe a community of interest. Parks and rec authorities, when you get down into Southeast Michigan, you have all the metro parks. Are you a homeschool family, and are you part of a homeschool co-op where they have a region and everybody who's a homeschool family in that area, you know, they're part of a co-op? Are you part of a faith organization like a church, the Catholic Church, where you have dioceses or regions throughout the state that you can look at to consider a community of interest? There's agriculture community of interest. A lot of our farmers, I think, you know, some of you may be from our, you know, lower northern, you have a lot of cherry farmers or apple farmers. They have a lot of the same migrant worker needs, and so they can be considered a community of interest. Over near Macomb County, we have the you know, defense and industry tech corridors, and so you can consider things like in Lansing, between Ingham County and Eaton County, it's the highest population of where state employees live. So you can consider areas of, you know, down in Jackson, it's the highest population of where corrections officers live, right around the prison. They have a unique need. So just different things that are directly in your community that can describe your municipality or your city or your county in a unique way, other than saying, I live in the city of Jackson and I want the city of Jackson to stay whole. Hopefully that kind of makes some sense.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
To our live studio audience, do you have questions for Meghan on the?
Yes, so the emails, every once in a while, you send us, saying to take action, call to action.
Yes.
So, are you able to see how many people really take action, really write to you?
I can. And I always tell people, don't fib if you tell me that you helped and you didn't, because I'll know. So the commission actually posts all of their public comments that they receive. The Constitution requires that the commission receive public comment either in an open meeting, where it's in the minutes, or that they receive communications with the public in writing. It's mandatory. They cannot discuss redistricting. If you see a commissioner at the gas station getting gas and you go up to talk to them about communities of interest or redistricting, they can't talk to you about it. They're prohibited in the Constitution from doing that. So they take all of the emails that they get. They will block out your address if you send them your address or your phone number, but they put them all in one big PDF every meeting for the comments they received that week, and you can review, and your name is right there with the email that you sent. So we can and we do track how many people participate in those calls to action.
I asked that question because I just responded on one email last night about their last name and their address, and all I would say is how, if the response wasn't active enough, how can we improve that? Or where should we go to talk to people to reinforce the importance of these responses to the redistricting?
So part of that is a multi-pronged approach. One of the reasons that I started to work on redistricting is Republicans have the propensity, when we don't agree with something, or we don't like it, or we think we're going to get screwed in the end, we do this self-fulfilling prophecy of ignoring whatever it is. When we're mad about an election, we're not going to vote because we're mad. Or we think we're going to lose in the end anyway, so we all stop voting. And newsflash, if we all stop voting, we're going to lose.
Right.
So the Democrats literally believe that Republicans are going to ignore the redistricting process, that we are not going to participate because we hate the commission. Most Republicans didn't vote for it. We think that we are going to end up with horrible lines against us, and so we're just going to kind of like wash our hands and ignore it. They've been very surprised that a number of us have taken this on, and we're telling everybody, listen, whatever we do, we can't allow the commission to sit in an echo chamber. It's our responsibility to participate in the process.
It's like we have to keep our seat at the table even though it's a very messy table. We can't relinquish.
Hang on.
So we don't necessarily like conflict in the same way that other folks do on the other side of the political aisle. That's not typically been our MO. But this is a scenario where we must keep our seat. The table's not pretty, the process isn't necessarily easy or clean, but the only opportunity that we have to appreciate the district lines that are drawn is to be able to be a voice that they can hear. Whether it's email, whether it's in person, we've got plenty of opportunity, and we need to be able to share the importance of this during our window of opportunity. When Meghan,
Do you know a process, or has there been a process already of defining these communities of interest?
that's what the process is right now. That's what they
That's
are
why they're having
taking
this
feedback on. Yes, yes.
And is there a finite number of those, or?
There's not a finite number of how to define communities of interest that I am aware of. People are defining it.
But are there a finite number of communities of interest?
It's not defined in the Constitution. The phrase is in the Constitution, but the definition of what that looks like and what that means is not. So some of the more general things: cherry farmers, agriculture, industrial, libraries, yes, 4-H teams, things like that are examples of how a community of interest can be defined.
Can a
And-
community of interest have, or can an area have more than one community of interest within it?
Can an area, I'm going to repeat your question because I think it's a great one. Can an area have more than one community of interest in it? Like, could several communities of interest be put together into a territory as newly defined in the maps with the Redistricting Commission?
Yes, absolutely.
Good.
And don't get too caught up in the size of your community of interest, because the commission is drawing huge congressional districts, and then they're drawing medium-sized Senate districts, and then small House districts. So your community of interest could be multiple counties when you think of the congressional level, or just a city on a state House level.
So if we're to send emails, let's say, and I'm assuming each person can send one email, is that correct, to share, or could you send multiple emails?
So I encourage everyone to participate. We do consistent calls to action on the commission, and I encourage people to participate in all of those. When it comes to community of interest input, I suggest that you give your input to the commission on your community one time. However, if it's something you're passionate about and you want to attend all 16 meetings, just kind of be upfront with them that, you know, it's good to see you again. I'm here because this is really important to me, and I want to make sure that you're listening to what I think is my community of interest input. But I would try to give the same testimony, if that makes sense.
And then the other thing, I think I'm understanding how you're defining this, but can you give us a way to articulate it that would hit the mark that we're trying to achieve? And then that way, because I have friends that support everything we're doing, but they never go to anything, they never get involved, but they will ask me. So if I can tell people and I say, okay, this is how you would articulate it, and if you would email it, your voice will be heard. So some type of statement that, of course, could be tweaked a little bit here and there, but if you could tell us how to articulate where it will hit its mark, that would be helpful for me.
So we are putting together kind of a sample testimony that you can give before the commission, and we will share that with Robyn when it's ready for her to pass along. The only thing that I will make sure to stress is please make it personalized to you.
Yes.
Right.
We've really learned that the commission does not respond well to what looks like canned or prepared feedback.
Sure.
If they feel like they are being manipulated by people simply trying to be political, they tend to kind of brush off that. The other thing that I want to make that's important to note, when you're communicating with the commission, if you're participating in a call to action or you're submitting your input, you're doing so as a resident of Michigan under your constitutional rights. You're not doing so as a precinct delegate. You're not doing so as a chair of a women's club. You're not doing so as chair of the party. You're doing so under your name as an individual resident of Michigan. Just leave politics. We don't need to associate our party or being a precinct delegate with it. We all have the right to participate in this process, and it's really important that we do so as residents,
Yes.
not as party activists.
That's an excellent point. Is that you've done a lot of calls to action and you've seen great results. And I love it that we're at the point in the process where you've kind of tested things or seen other people test things, and now you know what is effective and how we can present our questions, our concerns, our information in a manner that it's going to be received.
Yes. And we've been very successful in our calls to action, communicating with the commission. We've been able to knock out people they wanted to hire. We've been able to successfully add regional meetings in rural areas. And part of that is we do an organic call to action. If you get my emails, you'll have a call to action, but when you click on the button to email the commission, it's not a pre-filled out email. You have to write your own email to the commission. And that way it's in your own words. And we think that it's really important to call conservatives to participate in the process and participate in these calls to action, but make sure that they're doing so because they want to and they know how important it is, not because they clicked a button and it automatically sent an email to them.
That doesn't carry nearly the weight as an authentic, heartfelt
So
expression.
we've learned.
So
Correct.
we're looking for a more equal distribution of these communities of interest, or?
So what are they looking for? So when you, and Tony kind of hit on this, so Democrats tend to pack themselves by living in populated urban cities. Republicans tend to live in rural Michigan. Democrats have not had control of the Michigan Senate since the early 1980s. They won control. Within a couple of months, they passed a massive tax increase, so large that 2 of their members earned recalls. We were successful in recalling their 2 members, and they immediately lost majority halfway through their 4-year terms. And they have not ever had majority of the Michigan Senate since then. And when you look at 38 districts across our state, part of that is because you've all seen kind of the hotspot election map. We're a really red state, except you have the Detroit, Southeast Michigan blue spot. You have the little part in Grand Rapids. You have some towards the tips of our fingers. But for the most part, our state is really red, meaning we have a lot more red districts. They care about something called proportionality, which means if 58% of the state votes Democrat, that means 58% of the state Senate and state House seats should also be Democrat. And so what their goal is kind of like Tony said back in Southeast Michigan, where they're winning seats by 90 or 95%. They can take those down to 70% Democrat seats. They're still going to overwhelmingly win that district, but now they've been able to take 25% into maybe what used to be a 55% Republican seat. Now we can't even compete there. And so kind of imagine, and you can kind of, when you look at a map of Detroit and Southeast Michigan, you have the city center, but then you have, Woodward and all the streets that spoke outwards. So kind of imagine how they want to take those municipalities and do districts kind of out like a spokes wheel or jagged instead of nice compact square districts over there. And so their whole goal is to have thousands of communities of interest, which they're going to do, and then the commission is going to prioritize them to be able to draw the lines however they want. And this is just step 1. After we submit our community of interest input, they're going to release a sample map, and you're going to hear from us again to submit feedback on what that map looks like. And they have to take additional feedback from us, the public and the residents, before they vote on a final map.
As I understand, this whole map making process is taking longer than what they initially anticipated. And we are just now beginning the meetings, like you mentioned. May 11th is the first one. And this is going to be pushing back the timelines. Can you talk about the risk to the voting process and what's going to happen with our clerks if this timeline does in fact get pushed back, and what that looks like?
So either way from Sunday, this is going to be really messy.
I didn't say that again, please.
I said either way from Sunday, this process is going to be really messy. The reason that the commission is delayed is actually due to census delays. Between the pandemic, bureaucrats, the Trump administration had allowed people to submit census forms in ways that they never have before, that were not connected to their individual census ID number, which has caused the Census Department a lot of work to make sure that that individual did not submit a census form some other way. And so between a number of reasons, the census data that's needed for redistricting normally comes out the second week of March, and it's not going to be available now until September 30th. So we're talking months and months of delay. So that's really the major impetus behind the delay that the commission is seeing. With that said, what that's done is they have sought relief from the Supreme Court to move the date to have a finalized map from November 1st to January 25th. They're also looking to ask the courts to move the filing deadline for congressional candidates, state house and state senate seats to May 15th, back a month from mid-April. And that is going to really squeeze our clerks, because after people file for office, what normally would be a 4 to 5 week process to program the ballot, get ballot proofs done, have the candidates approve that the ballot is correct, our clerks will have a little under 14 days to get that done from that deadline. So it really pushes tight on them before they have to have their ballots to the printers so that they can have their ballots back and in the mail 45 days, at least 45 days out. Have no doubt about it though, as lines start to go on the map, current elected officials and candidates running for office on any of the state or congressional levels are all going to freak out. This process has intentionally taken them out of it. They have no control. We have many candidates who live next to each other. We have many elected officials that live miles apart, especially in Southeast Michigan. We are going to have multiple good Republicans who are forced into primaries or forced to move. We are going to have multiple candidates that declare for things like a congressional race that thought they were all running for districts, but based on where they live, they would all be running for the same district now. The reason the Secretary of State is seeking a delay in the filing deadline is we have multiple declared candidates for Congress right now.
Yes.
You can be out collecting signatures. Your district may be 90% different, and 90% of the signatures you collect won't count. So we have to give them time to know where their districts are going to be so that they can collect the signatures that they need to actually make the ballot. This affects more than just our clerks in that way. We have the state, we have counties, we have cities and townships, then we have precincts. But for redistricting, there's another layer under that called the census block. And when you look at a city, a census block is literally like a city block. When you get out into the country, it's usually defined by landmarks and natural features that the Census Bureau can use. The commission is being actively encouraged to redistrict down to the census block level. Not the precinct level, not the township level, the census block level.
That's really intense.
It is, and within a precinct, you could have 30 different census blocks. So unlike when your clerk sets their precinct lines, they know that precinct 1 will have this ballot and precinct 2 will have that ballot. What this means for the township clerks is, let's say you live on Jacobs Street. It means the north side could have precinct ballot 1A, and the south side could have precinct ballot 1B. They have to have twice as many poll workers, twice as many AV counting boards, twice as many tabulators. And so we are working diligently to contact as many of the township clerks, both Republicans and Democrats, and ask people to encourage their clerk to send a letter to the commission asking that they keep at least precincts whole while they do this. And what you're going to find is they're only going to be able to avoid breaking municipal lines so many times, and then it's going to happen. And after the map is finalized on January 25th, you're going to have township clerks and city clerks all over Michigan move their precinct lines. They are legally allowed to do that. They're going to reset their precinct lines to avoid ballot breaks as much as possible. For people like me, I'm a county chair. We can have close to 500 precinct delegates running in Livingston County, and usually by the end of January, beginning of February, I have close to 300, 400 people that have already filled out and filed their precinct delegate forms. If 20% of my precinct lines change, if you used to live in Genoa Township Precinct 9, but now you live in Genoa Township Precinct 11, your precinct delegate affidavit of identity is now considered invalid. And so our chairs and our groups that are working to recruit precinct delegates are going to have to be really diligent about checking the forms to make sure that people are listed in the right precinct after clerks move them around. There's a very good likelihood that there will be so much movement that county chairs will need to reapportion their precinct delegates again to make them align with the new lines. So this has a big impact not just on the congressional, state house, or state senate side, but it's going to impact precinct delegates, and that's just the redistricting that the commission is doing is only one type of redistricting. You still have your local county commission apportionment redistricting that happens at the same time here in Michigan, which a decade ago only about 19 counties went through an apportionment committee, and now 82 out of 83 counties will participate in that process. And so that's a 5-member panel: your county clerk, your county treasurer, your county prosecutor, and then the chair of the Republican and Democrat Party make up the 5 people who not only do they get to draw the county commission lines for your county, they get to determine how many county commissioners you have in your county, anywhere from 5 to 21. And they also will be drawing lines this year as well. So there's a lot here, isn't there?
Amazing, overwhelming.
I know.
Yes, I hope that you're understanding why this is such an important and complex topic for us. There's a lot at stake for Michigan right now, and we need everybody's involvement. I know there's a question back there.
Well, I just wanted the current commission, I did hear advertisements on the radio if you wanted to serve on it and so forth. How many people are on it, and is it bipartisan, or how did that get determined?
Great question. How many people here are a precinct delegate? None of you are eligible to serve on the commission.
Right.
Not only are you not eligible, neither is your spouse or your children or your parents.
Yeah.
So over 9,300 people applied to serve on the commission. There was a random process that took that down to about 100 people from each party, Republican, Democrat, and Independents. The Speaker of the House, the Senate Majority Leader, the majority or the minority leaders in the House and the Senate both got to knock people off the list. They were left with about 80 people from each party that they got to pick from. They hired a third-party vendor who live, and they released their algorithm that they used for this. It's part of the process that I actually believe was done pretty transparent and fair. Randomly selected 13 people to serve on this commission, 4 Republicans, 4 Democrats, and 5 independents. They are 13 everyday people who, obviously, you can't be a precinct delegate. You can't have ran for office in the last 6 years. You can't have given to a political candidate in 6 years. So we're talking people who have literally never been involved in politics, donated to an elected official, suddenly wanted to participate in one of the most, not one of the most, the most legal, complicated, technical parts of politics ever.
So intense.
And they get paid a pretty good fee, don't they?
They get paid they raise their pay, so they're making about $55,000 annually to do this. And you could kind of see it. I've watched every meeting of the commission from the beginning to when they really started to learn what they were going to be doing. They kind of all realized they've bitten off the butt of the elephant, in that this is really complicated and technical. And when you get into the Voting Rights Act on the federal level, with majority-minority districts, it's not as easy. They kind of all thought they'd get to just sit here and draw districts on a map, how they looked, and they realized that you don't get as much latitude as what you want. And so it'll be interesting to watch how this goes. A lot of people ask, what do they need to adopt the final map? So there's 4 Republicans, 4 Democrats, 5 independents. you have to have at least 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, and 2 independents vote in favor of the final map. So you can't just have all of the Democrats and independents vote together. You've got to have at least 2 of each in order to vote yes on the final map before they adopt a map.
Wow.
And
Could have a hung jury.
what's that?
Could have a hung jury.
Somebody's gonna need a whole
So
lot
you
of
really
coffee in
can't,
that
I mean, the
process.
Constitution clearly outlines if they can't come to a majority consensus on a map, what happens. If they can't come to a majority consensus on a map, each commissioner can draw their own map, and then the maps are then ranked by staff, and the commission then gets to vote on one of the maps that they draw. If they still can't come to a majority consensus, out of the maps that the commissioners draw, the Secretary of State makes the final decision and votes for the map. So I know that it can seem daunting, and I know that it's frustrating, but I can tell you this: I have a full-time job. I'm the mom to a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old. I would not be putting my time, money, and effort into this if I did not feel that Republicans can't impact a change.
Right.
I know we can. We already have. The Democrats absolutely believe that we're not going to be sitting there at the table, and we are. In fact, I was looking at a slideshow from the Democrat Party last night that they've released on redistricting, and there are literally points in there talking about how they're kind of surprised at the Republicans actually stepping up to participate
Good.
in this process. So I know we can make a difference.
Yes.
We just have to be there. As long as we're not leaving this commission in an echo chamber, I genuinely believe that we're going to have the opportunity, and we will end up with fair lines. And you're going to hear Tony and I repeat that. You're going to hear others repeat that. We don't want a Republican map. We don't want a Democrat map. We want a fair map with fair lines, and then we, all the grassroots, have to work together by electing good Republicans at the primary, raise money, and make the people of Michigan support and believe our message to keep the majorities in the Michigan House and Michigan Senate, and to take back the congressional delegation.
Yes. We need to get our messaging out.
Yes.
And we do need to stand together.
Yes.
That's so important. And I love it. I love it that you're bringing a message of hope, even in the face of such an intense project.
It is, and it's so important for this year. We're all focused on 22. I think we all know what's at stake. We see what's happening on the federal level. The Michigan State Senate doesn't have a filibuster. It's 50% plus 1. That's all you need to impact change here. We can go back to what happened with Granholm. She had a Democrat House for a couple of years while she was governor. She devastated our state, and that was with one chamber being Republican. There's only so much. The analogy I use is the little Dutch boy at the dam. They can stick all 10 fingers in the dam, but at the same time there's 100 other holes flowing around behind them. One chamber can only stop so much. And so it's really important when we talk about things like vaccine passports, mandatory vaccination of our kids, masks on our kids in schools. You look at the emails released from the teachers' unions impacting the CDC. You look at critical race theory. You look at taxes. You look at the Green New Deal and energy. All of that is on the line here. In Michigan, if we don't maintain majority of the Michigan House and Michigan Senate, no matter how good our candidates are, no matter how much money they raise or the party raises, if we don't have fair maps, literally none of that matters in 22. So I'm a really big believer that we all have to focus on 22, but before we get there as grassroots, we have to participate in the redistricting process first to make sure that we have a shot in 22.
Absolutely. It's about getting that sequencing right.
Yes.
We got to get this right so that we can win on these other levels.
Correct. Absolutely.
Beautiful.
And it's the future of our state for the next 10 to 20 years.
Yes. Yes. So much information, Megan.
So much.
Ladies, do you have any other questions for Megan?
Thank you for your information. I'm impressed with your knowledge.
Oh, thank you.
I
Yes.
just forgot one role.
Yes.
You mentioned county clerk, prosecutor, and the 2 party chairs, and which is the
The-
5th one?
County treasurer.
County treasurer. Thank you.
Yes.
All right.
So if I can, I will leave you with my email and my cell phone number. If anybody ever has any questions, or if you want more information about how to speak at a meeting, let me know and we'd be glad to connect you.
Fabulous. Thank you again so much,
Thank
Megan.
you.
It's been a pleasure having you.
I appreciate it.